Obviously, the rookies had a rough weekend, with the exception of Kimi Antonelli. That it was a rough weekend. It was a particularly rough weekend for Liam Lawson, which is our third producer question. Did Red Bull make the wrong decision putting Liam Lawson in that second seat? And then if they did, so it's like three and a half questions. If they did, who should they have picked instead?
Well, this is a very easy one for me to answer because I answered it at the end of last year and I felt Yuki Tsunoda
Yuki. Yes.
should have been in that seat for the start of this season. I think whoever's driving that car, it's an incredibly tough challenge to have because clearly that car's not easy to drive and clearly Max Verstappen is exceptional in everything he does. And so you're up against a very, very high bar that you've got to try and get over. So yeah, I mean, I felt from the start that Tsunoda was the choice. Having said that, I don't want to be too harsh on Liam at this stage. Like you just said, it was such a mixed weekend, so hard to get everything right and get everything sorted from the very start. He also had a an engine issue in final practice, which meant he lost a third of his running ahead of qualifying. Yeah, there were some concerning signs, some signs that would not have looked out of place if you'd swapped his name for Sergio Perez, and how far Perez was off last year. So I'm sure we've got some Mexican listeners screaming up their YouTube channel or podcast app saying, told you so. This is exactly what Perez went through. Why would you expect it to be any different
Okay.
with Liam Lawson?
So we'd had this conversation about doing, obviously, with the Colapintos of the world sitting there like looking over their shoulders. If Liam Lawson continues to struggle, if this is a sign of things to come, how short is that leash?
Yeah, it's short. I mean, it's Red Bull. We've seen this time and time again. Whether it be Max Verstappen replacing Kvyat or Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly weren't given a huge amount of opportunities to get things right, and then Perez eventually he obviously had a 2-year contract in place, and that got cut short. So we know that Red Bull will make the decision and will make a change if they feel the need to. I think the other factor in this is how well Yuki performs, and Yuki in Australia was fantastic. Okay, the end result didn't show it because he did the Ferrari strategy of staying out on
Mhm.
slick tires in the pouring rain, which is always questionable. Perhaps if there'd been a red flag at that period, it would have worked out beautifully, and he would have been the real hero and
It
be
wasn't
very
like it
much
was
knocking.
strategy that hurt him. It wasn't him.
Yeah, it wasn't him. So I mean, and also his performance in qualifying was fantastic. It
So
was
good.
really, really good. So I think if Yuki continues to perform like that and Liam continues to struggle, then it kind of becomes obvious after a while. And I'd be surprised, there's not much for Red Bull to lose by doing it. They keep Liam in the family, they can put him down in the racing bulls. It's not like other teams, like the Doohan situation, where Doohan would probably be out of F1, or almost certainly out of F1 for this season. With having the two teams, you can swap drivers, and Red Bull have always said, look, these drivers are not on a Racing Bulls contract or a Red Bull Racing contract. They're on a wider Red Bull contract, which means we can place them in either team as we see fit. So yeah, I mean, I hope Lawson's given an opportunity. I feel like we're not at that stage yet. The comments afterwards from Christian Horner were still fairly supportive. He pointed to some of the faster laps that Lawson managed to achieve in the race, all very familiar to anybody who was following Perez's season last year. But again, they gave Perez a chance until the end of the year. And then when they felt there was no other choice, they made the decision. So I think we'll see something similar. But yeah, Lawson already under pressure, and under pressure in a situation where, as I said, you're up against Max, you're up against the very best in the world. It's not easy.
It's an incredibly high bar, and I wouldn't want to be in his position. You know how we were talking last week about like Max can just drive a shoebox and like Max can
Yeah.
make the most out of like anything. I was sort of laughing in the middle of the race as we were like watching it happen, and like Max is, oh, we're not going to be in contention to fight for the win, blah, blah, blah. And even with most of us thinking the McLaren is like a rocket ship, where was Max? For the majority of the race, he was right there. And for the majority of the race, especially like that last lap, he was giving chase. And it's like, again, it's like, it can't be that bad, or he's just that talented.
I think he is, it's a bit of both, but he is so exceptionally talented. And in those conditions, everything in my brain was saying the McLaren is the faster car, the McLaren is the better car.
Yes.
Lando is a very good driver in himself, but there was another part of me which was saying Max is going to get him. He's going to find him. He's going to, find a way past. Didn't quite
Especially
happen
when
in the
Lando
end.
had that little bobble. the tiniest bobble on, I think it was the last lap or the second to last lap, and
Yeah,
like turn five, turn six, somewhere in there.
turn
Lando
six,
had the
yeah.
smallest bobble, and like you just were like, is that enough momentum to really let him close the gap? Like,
And we know what Max can do. I mean,
right.
2021 Abu Dhabi, the obvious example where he overtook Lewis, I think, earlier on that final lap than anybody expected him to do it. So yeah, with Max, you've always got options, haven't you, as a team? There's always a possibility that he's going to put you back in the fight, and that must be such a nice feeling for Red Bull right now because definitely that car isn't exactly where they want it. I think it is probably a little bit better than a lot of people expected. But yeah, when you put Max behind the wheel, he just makes up the difference. And I'm glad you brought it up actually, because I feel like we haven't really touched on Max, and that
Yeah,
was an exceptional performance again.
we haven't talked about him, which is kind of nice because I'm sure that there are a couple of times throughout the season we'll be like, oh my God, we have to talk about Max again.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.